Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Daniel Chofi. I'm the League's Development and Membership Manager. And I'm excited to be introducing the first of what we are planning to be an ongoing series of spotlight presentations on some of the grants that have been supported through our Independent Projects Grant Partnership with NISCA. So this is just imagined as a sort of informal lunchtime set of presentations and conversations just to get familiar with some of the work that has been done as part of these programs, and that's currently ongoing this cycle. So we have two presentations today. I'm just going to introduce my colleagues here, and then I'm going to introduce our speakers. We'll hear from both of them, and then we'll have an opportunity for a Q&A. So here with me from the League is our program director, Anne Rieselbach, and manages many of our programs, has been instrumental in helping to get this Spotlight series off the ground. So thank you, Anne. Also with me is my program partner at NISCA, Kristen Herron, in the programs of architecture and design and museums. I hope that I've gotten that right. And Kristen is my full partner on the other side of this team that we have here between the League and NISCA to offer independent projects. I'm also joined today by the presenters that we're going to be hearing from. So we have Antoinette Cooper and Ifeoma Ebo. Antoinette is a writer, TEDx speaker, a trauma-informed participatory designer, and founder of the nonprofit Black Exhale, a space for the liberated Black body. Committed to healing collective trauma through the arts, ancestral healing, and medical humanities, she sits on the board of the narrative medicine at CUNY School of Medicine. Ifeoma Ebo is an urban designer, planning strategist, artist, and architect. Ebo is principal of Creative Urban Alchemy, a studio working at the intersection of these fields that centers cultural heritage in praxis. She is an assistant professor for design and sustainability at the Spitzer School of Architecture at City College of New York. And we're also going to be hearing from our second team, Robert Brackett and Dukes Koschitz. So Robert is an adjunct associate professor at Pratt Institute School of Architecture and the co-director of the DRA, the Center for Design Research and Architecture. He's the co-founder and technical director of Miscellaneous Projects, a multidisciplinary studio that incorporates architecture, fabrication, computation, and design to make things at many scales. And Dukes is a professor in design and technology at Pratt Institute School of Architecture and the director of the Pratt Center for Design Research and Architecture. He has published, lectured, and exhibited widely on the topic of curved creases in computation and design. So we're looking forward to hearing from both of these project teams on the work that they've been doing with their independent projects grants. So in a second, I'm going to turn it over to my program partner, Kristen, to provide a little bit of background on the partnership, what independent projects is and where it comes from. But before I do that, I just want to remind everybody who's here, there is an opportunity to ask questions. We're going to have a semi-moderated Q&A session at the very end after the presentations. So please do feel free to put your questions into the Q&A function on Zoom throughout the conversation, and we'll respond to those at the end. You're also more than welcome to use the chat. You can use that to express excitement, just to share ideas. Please don't put any questions in there because we won't be monitoring it for that purpose. So if you do have questions, we would love to hear them. Please put them in the Q&A. So yeah, without further ado, I think I'll turn it over to Kristen to give a little bit of an introduction and background, and then I will talk about more of the program goals, where we are now, and what we can expect for the upcoming independent project cycle. Hi, Kristen.
Thanks so much, Dan. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad that you're able to participate today and so grateful for our upcoming presenters. Independent Projects has been a commitment of the New York State Council on the Arts since 1987 to provide artist support in design fields. For the past 2 years, we've changed the administration of it to work with the League, which has been, from my perspective, an incredible benefit to this grant opportunity. The League brings just a wealth and depth of administrative skills and promotional skills. So it has also allowed us to increase the number of awards we give out, which I'm just very proud and happy about. So we are looking forward to launching 2024 coming up soon. I am also just really happy to be here today at this first Spotlight series to hear more from 2 of our recent recipients. So enjoy, and thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Kristen. Yes, so I'm sure many of you are familiar with independent projects. We've been offering this as a cycle in partnership with direct partnership with NISCA for the last 2 years. As Kristen said before, that the program had really significant longevity as a program that was offered just solely by NISCA. So for many years, the League has been essentially offering the opportunity for people to seek support for independent projects through this program, basically They would apply, we would submit the application on their behalf, prepare materials, and then we would re-grant funds to them for projects that were selected for funding. For the last 2 cycles, it's transformed into a full partnership, which is really exciting. I think that it's been incredibly fruitful. I've been honored to be a part of it. And I think one of the many benefits that we've been seeing from that is not only sort of increased access to the program, but also increased opportunities to share the work that this program makes possible, which, this is just one example of the ways that we're seeking to do that. So independent projects, essentially, the program supports creative and research projects in design for the people of New York State. So because it's a NYSCA program, it's publicly supported by NYSCA using public funds from the state. So it's available to design professionals throughout the state for year-long projects in creation or research of a design problem or topic that seeks to advance the design discipline and move the discipline forward. So in our most recent cycle, which just concluded the 2023 cycle, these projects are now ongoing. We supported 25 projects for funding with grants of $10,000 each to enable them to carry out year-long projects. And as I said, those are happening now. So we will have more information about the upcoming cycle. I can imagine that many people who are here today are interested to learn more about that and about the eligibility requirements and about deadlines and things like that. If you're interested, please do subscribe to the League's newsletter. You can just find it at archleague.org/newsletter. We'll be sharing more information and public announcements about this cycle soon, and we definitely welcome everybody to apply. So if you're interested, now is a great opportunity to hear more about what kinds of projects this does support, but keep in mind that these are just 2 examples of the many, many kinds of work that have been supported that can be supported. And if you have any questions, please always feel free to reach out to me and Kristen about that if you'd like to discuss your ideas for a project. So without further ado, I guess I'll turn it over to our first set of presenters today. So that's Ifeoma Ebo and Antoinette Cooper. Their project is Reparations in Public Space. So welcome, Ifeoma and Antoinette.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to the Architectural League and the New York State Council on the Arts for the opportunity for us to share the progress of our work. Again, my name is Ifeoma Ebo, founding principal of Creative Urban Alchemy.
Hi, and my name is Antoinette Cooper, founder of the nonprofit organization Black Exhale. Thank you for everyone.
So we are both also here representing our individual practices. And although we've received this funding does not support our individual practices. It supports this particular project, research project that we're working on. But I'm principal of Creative Urban Alchemy, which is a design studio working at the intersection of art, architecture, urban design, and planning, centering equity and justice.
And Black Exhale is a nonprofit organization supporting healing multiple intergenerational traumas within the Black community, and we do so by creating spaces of sanctuary.
So in this, this inception of this research was really exploring a number of things. Reparations in public spaces, really exploring what does it take in public space to create spaces for restoration and repair, particularly in light of the fact that, during the pandemic, the public spaces were our spaces of respite when we're all sort of like confined to indoors and experiencing the trauma collectively. And that was sort of one of the questions that came to us is, how do we change spaces that also hold trauma into spaces of collective healing, while also using collective imagining in that process of making and using artificial intelligence.
And with a trauma-informed lens, then we can actually look at what are the spaces currently holding and having that inform what we design. And we're focusing on African burial grounds. The most prominent, the most visible of the African burial grounds is the one in Lower Manhattan. These are sites that hold bones, hold narratives that have been erased post-trauma. And for us, we're primarily focusing on the African burial grounds in Brooklyn, Flatbush African burial grounds, but there are many burial grounds that continue to be unearthed, especially as development projects continue to build throughout New York City. So the bones are an acknowledgement of the people who were here, the people who worked the lands, the people who loved, people who were erased. And we have a choice where we can continue with erasure or we can practice repair. And repair is the root word in reparations. And when we look through that lens, then we acknowledge that how and where we bury our dead matters. And as things become unearthed in the land, then we acknowledge that things are becoming unearthed in our communities and within our bodies as the unmourned becomes visible. And then we design, how do we actually acknowledge that? How do we put that into practice? How do we have that inform the spaces that we create? In order to have a trauma-informed conversation, we need to first understand the first part of that, which is, what is trauma? That is an essential thing to look at when we're practicing repair. So trauma can be looked at through it being an event, something that has happened, the experiences, it can be experienced differently in each individual, in each community, in each family, and then the lasting effects of that trauma. And a trauma-informed approach realizes the impact of trauma and recognizes the signs and symptoms of trauma in our communities and responds by integrating that trauma knowledge into our practices and our designs and actively resists re-traumatization. The result of a trauma-informed approach to this work becomes a reclamation of participatory design practices. It also becomes an opportunity to integrate ancestral intelligence, which is the original AI, as a necessary component to this work. And we then are able to create environments that become spatial repair sites. We started by practicing what we say by first inviting community members to a workshop upholding design practices. We started by sharing in land acknowledgements, ancestral acknowledgements. We shared about trauma and how to deepen our awareness of that in our homes, communities, and in the collective in ways that leave us with agency, because we're creating a space to reimagine a future, an environment that centers our experiences. And so here we have images of the community workshop that we held in Brooklyn in October. And I'll pass it to Ifeoma.
Thanks. Yeah, so we're grateful to Pratt Institute for providing space for us to hold this workshop. We're also grateful to the Flatbush African Borough Coalition. Many of their members attended this workshop. And so we divided folks into separate rooms. First, we had a collective conversation about what exactly is trauma, how does the land hold trauma? And really this research project was really also exploring what are the spaces that hold trauma for Black people in particular. So we're really centering Black people in this research project. And so the conversations also explored what are healing spaces? What are the characteristics of healing spaces? And through collage making, as you can see in one of the images, we had college students from different institutions around the city who were driving the Midjourney. So they were sort of sitting at the computer and then just listened in as representatives from the coalition and other members of the community just talked about healing spaces, talked about Black joy. What does that look like? What does it feel like? And as they were talking, the students were generating images using some of the text, some of the language and words that were being used in conversation. And so it was a really, it was a great imagining session, but it's not without challenges. There are definitely some biases embedded in the use of artificial intelligence tools like Midjourney. For example, in some of the initial images that were being produced, white people were being centered, white men were being centered, men were being centered. And so it took some extra effort to be a bit more detailed in the descriptions of the prompts to make sure that people with natural hair, Black people with natural hair were being centered, that women were being included, that non-binary people were being included. And so I think it was just an exercise of learning that, to create a future vision, you have to be more detailed. You have to actually crystallize what you want to see in the future. And this workshop, I think, brought that to the forefront. But it was a really, I think, a good exercise of, when you're typically doing an engagement process, the process of actual creating visualizations to what people want to see, it takes a while. Whereas this felt immediate. It felt like as people were talking, they were able to sort of see a representation of the things that they were saying, and then could add on top of it and sort of refine and fully define the experience that they wanted to experience in the space. So we also used a trauma-informed design framework, and this is shop work architecture, and it was centering empowerment, hope, connection, joy, peace of mind, and safety. This was a framework we shared with the group before we started the workshop. And this is also a framework that's inspiring or influencing some of the strategies that are being used to create speculative ideas for transforming African burial grounds from spaces that hold trauma to spaces of joy and liberation. So these are some of the images that came out of the Mid-Journey workshop. And so some of the things that people expressed were that they wanted to see spaces of education, for music, for healing circles, for libations, meditations, offerings to the ancestors, connection to nature, intergenerational connection, collective making, Black joy, dance, storytelling, vibrant colors, cultural motifs, connection to water, focus on youth, sacred mysticism, and space to honor the ancestors. And so this, what Antoinette mentioned before in terms of ancestral intelligence, in my journey of sort of moving forward and creating speculative ideas for transforming public space into healing spaces, I tap into my own cultural heritage. And so I'm Nigerian, have a Nigerian background. And so I explored what do healing spaces look like in Nigeria, just tapping into ancestral wisdom. And so what you see on the right is an image of an Mbari house, which is a healing space in the southeastern region of Nigeria. And so the artwork that you see on the outside are often crafted by women. So women at the center of crafting and beautifying these healing spaces. And they do so through these cultural motifs, this symbolism that's also messaging. Each symbol has a different proverb or story connected to it. And so there's this relationship between the building as a platform for storytelling and healing practices. And you can see in the actual the Mbari house that there are representations of people sitting and resting. So that is also something that sort of like shows up in ancestral intelligence. The symbolism is also connected to body art, that it's used on the body as a form of storytelling and healing as well. And it shows up in fabric. So there's this connection between the physical space and the body itself, and the tools for adornment in terms of symbolism, cultural motifs, and then the weaving and fabric making. And so all of these things, all these explorations are guiding the types of design that's being created and the kind of visual representation of this design. So I've also been exploring the use of Mid-Journey artificial intelligence to create some speculative beginning sketches of what these pavilions in public space can look like. And so these pavilions are using natural materials such as wood. They're also incorporating cultural motifs from the Uli art, which is the art that you saw the woman painting on the wall, and really trying to explore what does it look like to create a space that holds this ancestral intelligence, that also creates space for all of the different experiences that people expressed that they wanted to experience during our workshops. And so also looking to other forms of craft making and weaving, such as crocheting and quilt making as a form of creating structure for spaces, for features, for furniture. Again, also learning from ancestral wisdom and learning from cultural heritage, creating spaces that allow people to have a form of respite, particularly for Black women to rest, creating a sense of nest as a space where people feel a sense of safety and security. So all of these references are what we're also going to be showcasing in a future exhibition happening this summer at Pratt Institute. And so finally, the form of representation is also looking at repair, repairing spaces, creating abstract forms of repair, weaving together ancestral and artificial intelligence, particularly in this image, which is an image created in Midjourney, but then woven in with African fabric. So that is also going to be a part of the explorations that I'm working on for this exhibition in June.
And the exhibit creating a space where we can have conversations about repair and imagine what repair looks like in various communities.
So we want to thank our funders and supporters. This work is being supported by the Black Artists and Designers Guild, the Flatbush African Burial Ground Coalition, Pratt Institute, who's been so gracious in providing space, the Architectural League, and the New York State Council for the Arts.
Thank you.
Council on the Arts, sorry. And we invite everyone to join us June 15th to August 15th for our exhibition. It will be held at Pratt Institute Hazel and Robert Siegel Gallery in Higgins Hall in Clinton Hill, Brooklyn. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you both. That is incredibly fascinating. I do have some questions of my own, and I can't wait to talk about this more. But before we get there, it's time to hear from the second set of presenters, Robert and Duke. So they provided a pre-recorded video that we're going to share. So we'll be pulling that up on the screen right now. And then we'll have the opportunity. This is just a reminder, if you do have questions now or as we're watching that presentation, please do feel free to put those in the Q&A, or you can wait until the moderated session.
Hello, I'm Robert Brackett. I'm joined by my colleague, Duke Koschitz. We are the participants in the grant by the Architecture League and New York State Council on the Arts. We are directors of the DRA Lab at Pratt Institute, part of the School of Architecture here. The DRA is the Center for Design Research and Architecture, where we bring together concepts and techniques from geometry, material science, and fabrication technology to explore novel ways of designing and making architecture with an interdisciplinary approach to research. The Architecture League of New York's Independent Projects grant and the support of the New York Council of the Arts helped to fund this project that we titled Super Lightweight Pneumatic Formwork for GFRC Fabrication, or self-forming 2D patterns making 3D structures with air. For this, we are interested in a question of, can we translate the shape of air into stable forms for architecture? For context, this interest is based on research that we conducted in the 2021-22 school year with Pratt students. We're in the DRA lab, and in the studio courses, we worked with inflatable architecture as a mechanism for design activism. One of our studio projects was the pop-up drop-off, which was a structure designed with a 2D pattern welded into upcycled film plastic waste that popped up into a 3D high-par structure when inflated. The colorful spectacle of plastic bags served as a structure for collecting film plastic and engaging with people in conversation about film plastic waste in architecture and the public realm, and how it could be engaged with recycling in New York City. The project was based on research into fabrication and geometry of pneumatic forms that could leverage super lightweight consumer film plastics to quickly design, prototype, and build full-scale structures that would have impact by engaging in an act of public design activism. It's a chance for young designers to build something bigger than themselves, to see the consequences of one of their designs, and to participate in a critical public conversation. The project evolved into a professional collaboration with the firm Newhouse, an inflatable design company in Rhode Island, to develop the pop-up drop-off pavilion in Times Square for New York by Design and Design Pavilion in 2022. The updated structure was constructed of industrial waste plastic that we selected from Newhouse's kind of scrap and garbage bins to continue the spirit of upcycling materials at an architectural scale and reach a larger audience. Self-forming inflatable high-par made from upcycled waste popped up a few more times at events that were supported by the Independent Project grant in New York City and New York State. The funds helped to have Research assistants participate in the deployment of the structure at these various events and foster their community engagement around film plastic waste, waste in architecture, and design research. From observing people engage with the structure, we became interested in ways that the inflatable forms we were testing here could become more permanent architectural ideas. We asked, can we translate that shape of air into stable forms? And this brings us to the primary use of the grant funding, which was to find ways, yes, by the picture here, to do this. We developed several methods for researching ways of using this material, these lightweight pneumatic structures, as formwork for GFRC, or glass fiber reinforced concrete production, that would solidify or capture something of those air forms. The first thing we needed to do was have a way to make a lot of rapid prototypes at various scales to understand how this stuff behaves and really refine the kind of 2D to 3D relationship that was explored in the original research and then manifest at the larger scale through the pop-up drop-off. And the way we did this was by using a custom-built CNC machine for welding high-density polyurethane or plastic sheets, primarily supported through the grant. We inherited kind of the skeleton and bones of this DIY CNC machine for heat welding layers of thermoplastic from Seiwei Wang, and to produce prototypes at a scale that would allow us to iterate on this 2D to 3D inflatable pattern geometry. We had to kind of go through a series of redesigns and upgrades to the machine that would make it more reliable, faster, and more consistent to our research process. So about half the grant funds went to designing, documenting, purchasing, and building a more robust framing structure for the machine, and then some upgrades to various drive assembly and controller components, as well as a lot of materials to support the operation. We constructed a more robust and rigid frame that provided a much more stable platform for consistent welding, and this significantly reduced welding errors and made the prototyping process much more productive. The machine now offers an 8-foot by 8-foot welding area for making much larger scale prototypes quickly. We can often iterate 3 or 4 designs in a day, depending on the complexity. And another benefit that this new structure offered was that in our constrained space, in our research lab at Pratt, and we often struggle to find places to put things. Such a large machine takes up a lot of space, but elevating it on a more robust framework with these legs gave us a lot of floor space back for storing all the materials that we test with this: bags of concrete, rolls of plastic, film, and various other components. The funding also helped us to devote resources to paying student research assistants that could create better documentation of the machine, draw up the new designs, create bills of materials, and provide a documentation system that would allow for other people to build upon this research, whether that's internal research assistants understanding how everything works, or publishing this on our website to give others an opportunity to try to construct their own way of prototyping at a large scale. We experimented a lot with the materials that support the actual welding surface, the surface of the bed on the machine, and found that a layer of really high density industrial felt covered with a layer of PTFE or Teflon made for a good base surface. This allowed for the machine to press hard with minimal deformation to the surface to create a nice consistent weld line. There are 2 layers or so of HDPE that then have another layer of the Teflon on top, and this layer is heat resistant enough so that we don't get burned through on the plastic. It provides very consistent heat transfer, so we can predict like the right temperature and speeds for welding. And it also is very smooth and slick, as Teflon is, to allow the head of the machine to move more freely. It's durable enough not to tear, and we can get a lot more rounds of prototyping out of a single sheet. So a big part of like testing materials there was important and funded by the grant resources. Look here, before the upgraded bed and structure, we would often get a lot of welding errors. This is a very large area that was actually successful, and you can see a lot of deformation, tearing, twisting, pulling. Very common thing would be that the protective sheets, which were using kind of durable papers and other things, would tear through from the pressure of the machine, causing all the plastic to burn and melt, and then starting all over again. And here we see after the machine, we get a much cleaner, more consistent weld. It's really kind of drawing lines into that material pattern. And generally those hold quite well, and we get very few failed prototypes, if any, at this point. So the upgrades have made a significant improvement in our prototyping schedule. There's a very DIY nature of the machine, and other parts of the funding helped us kind of go through and document a lot of this to put into drawings and annotation, as well as clean a little bit of it up, make it more durable for long-term use. One of the things we even did with this was we took the original head assembly, which had been made to heat weld and cut, and started to develop multiple heads for it so we could put in pens or markers, and not only can it be used to directly weld, say, a 2D pattern like we're doing here in this project, but also to draw out much larger patterns for production in other means, whether that's hand welding for more complex shapes or sewing, where a lot of the inflatable or pneumatic structures are produced through that mechanism. The grant brought this machine to life in 2023, and we continue to develop a lot of inflatable research with it today. We can test patterns for self-forming behavior at about 1/3 the scale of the original pop-up drop-off, which is getting close to that scale of architectural prototyping and really help us see the behaviors at a true size. We can now iterate on designing airforms to test a larger problem space with greater confidence of what will come out of it to then move to more expensive or complex forms of production. But we're back now to kind of our original interest in these airforms and how can we bring these forms to a more permanent base in architecture. We have a better understanding of what works, and we have a means for rapidly prototyping the designs so we can build upon that initial project's research and move toward our goal of making super lightweight pneumatic formwork for concrete production. The remainder of the grant funds, again, about the other half, went to developing glass fiber reinforced fabrication methods using these 2D patterns as pneumatic formwork. We found a design we liked, we were able to iterate it on the machine. It's a pop-up of this 2D pattern into a 3D form that reflects the same spatial potential we were interested in originally. And we were able to purchase a lot of the equipment and materials for experimenting with glass fiber fabrication. We needed heavy compressors, industrial mixers, specialized high-performance concrete mixes and additives, as well as the glass fiber reinforcing, and many other small material consumables that protect the space, protect ourselves, and allow for working with these more architectural materials. We conducted many rounds of prototyping and testing to experiment with how to apply the concrete to these inflated forms and learn what would happen when you put a lot of weight on them. Our first larger surface test here had like a lot of challenges, but also started to work in some areas, taught us a lot about the mixture. Well, not everything went perfectly. With a little ingenuity along the way, this stuff doesn't happen instantly, so you can play with it and understand it. We were able to make a lot of notes and documentation on how to work with the methods of application, as well as the mixture of the concrete. And while there are many deficiencies in that first formwork, it was kind of a test to see if it can do something, we did get something out of it, something that held a shape, held a form, began to translate the pneumatic pressure system of this 2D pop-up 3D form pattern relationship into something that started to look interesting, to reflect some of the nuances there. And that's how we were able to take that research and some other things that were also happening on the machine at the time and present them at Pratt's Research Open House to showcase the support of the Architecture League of New York and the New York State Council on the Arts in an academic and industry-facing event. We then went back to the drawing board, where we got a lot of mileage from the CNC machine to develop supplemental pneumatic support structures, really like a formwork for the mold work that would hold more pressure and keep this thing in the kind of correct configuration, pulled into a form of tension or a form of active structure that the concrete could then mold along. And that took a bit of time, but led to kind of our next big attempt with the actual spraying of the concrete surface. We had learned to work more in layers for better material control and adhesion, to be able to control the thickness and get consistency, and to have more time to interact with the molding process. Here with a research assistant last summer, using some of our expanded space in the building, we were able to really take our time with the space and develop this process of mix, spray, mix, spray, mix, spray, find the amount that can cover a surface of a certain size, understand and document that, and then get from 2 hours of application time to a couple of hours of waiting while the pneumatic system holds up the support time to get to a self-supporting state of this concrete shell. While it's very hands-on and messy and it provides a lot of challenges, it does lead to us being inspired that this can continue to scale up. And the current prototype is about 1/8 the scale of the original pop-up drop-off structure, but also at the scale of furniture or a building panel made out of this material, which is often used in that case. Part of the process produces many interesting artifacts from the geometry of the self-forming pattern. It really reflects a lot of that tension and pressure that goes into the structure. It also operates in a very consistent way, kind of geometrically on these like high-par ruled surface structures that we can study further in the digital realm. And it's exciting to see that in the process of exploring this question of can we make these lightweight formworks for concrete production, we're also opening up new territories of geometry research, material research, and refining our methods of fabrication to build stuff at the architectural scale. And it's because of this that we're able to extend this work beyond what the grant was able to support into further rounds of research. And we're excited to continue to refine and explore these forms of production methods as a potential strategy for making lightweight architecture and furthering the mission of the DRA, where we plan to develop publications from the ongoing research and use what we learned here to engage students and research assistants to explore more novel approaches for design making with a public impact. I'd like to thank the Architecture League of New York and the New York State Council of the Arts for the Independent Project Grant. It has been a good experience for us and was really helpful in finding ways of design making. So thank you.
Thank you both. That was really fascinating. Amazing to see the amount that can be accomplished in just a year with this grant. So yes, I'm going to ask my team and the presenters to come back on camera now, so we can just have a couple minutes of conversation. I have a couple of questions just coming out of those two presentations. So I'm going to be speaking a little bit off the cuff. As always, again, please feel free to throw any questions from the audience in the Q&A on Zoom. We'll be happy to answer those live. So, oh, that's fine. We're having some technical trouble with someone starting a camera, but that's fine. We can be audio only if that's easiest. No worries. Oh, there, great. Okay, so we're all here. Yeah, so I mean, I guess just thinking about these two projects kind of on their own terms, but also together, when we were scheduling this particular event, we by no means were selecting them based on any kind of similarity or difference, but I do think that there are some really interesting kind of connections and through lines in both of these projects that I'm very curious to explore a little bit. And these have been, I mean, just hearing how each team talks about these projects, I think it really does emphasize the degree to which design speculation is such an important part of these grants and this grant program, and the sort of the design innovation or kind of like forward future thinking is a really important part of kind of the spirit of the program. I'm really struck and curious about this overlap that I was picking up on with using intangible or sort of immaterial materials in order to generate kind of speculative design ideas. And so, in the case of your project, Ifeoma and Antoinette, that's, I think, dialogue and kind of generative text, and using text to create, to kind of prompt a computer, prompt an AI chatbot, basically to produce speculative visuals. And then in the case of Robert and Duke's, using air, air, something that we don't think about as having a form, having a substance. So I'm really curious to think about that a little bit further. But I think first I just want to start by asking each of you to talk a little bit about where you think this work that you've done could go next, whether you think there's any possibility that it could come to be in the world, come to be in a kind of public space. particularly because this is a public grant, it's supported with public funds from the state. The public component and public engagement is such an important part of that. And so it would be so interesting to hear from you, like what possibility is there to actually see some of this out in the world one day?
Yeah, I can certainly go first. So this is also, research for my practice, Creative Urban Alchemy, and we've been hired by the Grow House Design and Development Group, which is the leadership of that organization is also a part of the Flatbush African Burial Ground. And so they've been doing a lot of work in creating art and participatory art and activation around the Flatbush African Burial Ground. So we've been hired by them to support them in creating art and activation around the burial ground in central Brooklyn. And so much of this exploration of speculative design ideas, but then also Midjourney as a tool for community engagement has been a part of that process. And so this summer, our aim and goal, hopefully, if all the powers that be open, the doors open wide, we will be producing public art in the burial ground itself. It's a vacant site, and so much of this idea of weaving, of cultural motifs, of using natural materials, of participatory making, collective making is going to be definitely a part of it. And so this was a really great opportunity for me to test that out and explore what does that look like, what could it look like, and gave me space to dream. And I think it gave the coalition space to dream as well.
Yeah, and the dreaming is a very necessary part of the creation process, especially when we're looking at sites that hold trauma. And for the most part, because we don't have that skill set, then we instead turn away. And in the turning away, it has a negative impact in various communities. And so if we can develop ourselves and strengthen our capacity to be with these sites, which is just underneath all of us in New York City, like really, what can we do with those sites to provide the reference that was missing so that the present gets transformed and so that we are living into a powerful future where there's so much more harmony?
I think for us, I mean, currently just outside the door behind me here, we're working to refine kind of the stuff you saw in the video at that scale and make it into a more tangible product, like clean edges, fine details, and see it operate in the world at that size and scale, while continuing to develop kind of partnerships with the GFRC company and other things around New York State, which is actually based in New York State. It's Trinic who provided or helped us get started with all the material to hopefully one day start continuing to march towards both being able to simulate it and analyze it and calculate it to build it at full scale as a piece of public work like the original pop-up drop-off was in 2022.
And let's say in terms of like just general dissemination, these grants are super important for us because we can do an experiment at scales that we normally wouldn't, and we can do it outside of a curricular context, and we can do it with that sort of design speculation in mind, which is very difficult if you're getting, let's say, research-oriented money. Then the speculative part, gets reduced to a bare minimum. And so one way for us to get these things out are to play with these different scales. So New York by Design, for example, has submissions that are at the furniture scale. So that's definitely something that we'll look into. We will publish it in articles wherever we can, whether they're more academically inclined or more design focused. But it's sort of do it at different scales at the same time, even if the aspiration is for something much larger in the future.
I was really struck by the intersection of technology and really 21st century technology and craft, which is something we were talking about ahead of time. And I have kind of questions for each of you. the kind of interlace on that one. The first one on the shells is there a possibility for replicability? You talk about learning how to reinforce the bracing. Is that material recyclable? And also, you know, it makes it a tremendous saving from traditional formwork. So how that plays out in terms of multiple shells. And then I was really struck, Ifeoma, by that last image of the quilt, and really taking the AI imagery and then literally weaving it together with you know, ages old form. And that whole process of visualizing with the community certainly gave you great formal spaces, but also there looked like there were some material explorations within some of those imaginings too, and how that kind of played out, and then how that can be translated into form. So.
In the context of the lightweight and reusability of the formwork, I mean, that's one of the interesting goals there. Specifically, the stuff we were working on with the grant is using HDPE, which is in some technical sense recyclable, but the process is not destructive to the mold. So like I've used the same pattern welded to test many times on top of it. So like it's a small amount of material, very low in density, to test these forms and get something usable, and then be able to use that multiple times to see how it translates or to iterate on the process. So that part's very nice. And at a larger scale, it goes from being something like the plastic, which is kind of manageable to weld, to something that would be sewn together in more industrial materials, but has that same effect that like it can be reused, since it itself is just a supporting structure rather than a filled or like broken mold that comes apart later.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. And you know, what came out in the workshop was definitely talking about quilt making as just the practice or the realm of the woman in particular, but then also a tool for that can be therapeutic, even, you know, crocheting as a therapeutic practice, but then also descending from African fabric and textile making. So it is a, you know, it's a form of art practice that I think connects the different cultures across the African diaspora. And for someone to make a quilt and understand that there's this connection back to the, you know, African homelands, that can be a healing in itself, of just like having a cultural practice that has been retained and that someone is continuing to use in new and interesting ways. And so it made so much sense to print images on canvas. That's what you saw in that image, was that the Midjourney images were printed on canvas and then woven with African textile fabric. And just as idea of not only, it's sort of like many different layers of repair, it's sort of repairing this connection between the visualization of a space that's meant for repair, but then also a practice that is connecting the different cultures across the diaspora, but then also just like practically the image itself is cut up and then brought back together by this weaving. And so that's been an interesting, you know, exploration that just really came up recently for me. And so I'm still on this journey of researching and exploring and diving into ways of combining these different, this artificial and ancestral intelligence that Antoinette, you know, mentioned. And it's been really fun to do that.
Yeah. And I think of also with indigeneity, African indigeneity, it really is about expanding beyond the boundaries. That's part of our medicine. And quilt making is a liberatory practice. And when we think of the diasporic identities within Blackness and what is afforded through quilt making, it's the putting together of all of these different identities, these different experiences, and also an opportunity to titrate our experiences as well, that a piece can hold both the beauty and the brutality of an experience, and developing that skill set and having it show up in all of our practices. Because in the workshop itself, like creating the physical space, the low-tech space, was a curated experience that then informed what the AI experience would be, because there was much more agency available in curating the physical space. There was the music that was allowed. There were the images that were first chosen by me to then be printed out, to then be given, versus like cutting that part out, and AI then produces what's there for you. So all of those different points are informing one another.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
one very, very
ahead.
quick thing that I wanted to add. Craft is really, we need to expand craft to digital craft. Like, we can be crafty with a laptop, phone, microprocessor, it doesn't matter. And the one big aspiration for us is to actually test things that are maybe complicated and require some expensive machinery, but make that accessible so that other people can test and play with these types of technologies in a much more affordable and low-tech realm. So this is our job, to sort of figure out things that have a positive impact, whether it's carbon footprint or ease of assembly or speed or affordability, and then get it out and publish it so that it becomes accessible. And I love this notion of yes, it's all very crafty and has to be, because it's about bringing the digital and the physical world together.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm really glad that you asked that question, Anne. I was thinking too about the kind of cyclicality of the work being done in both of these projects, and also the kind of iterative learning process. It's it's experimental. I mean, I think that's part of the spirit of it. I was really struck, Ifeoma, when you were saying, you were describing these sort of traditional building forms that use the building as a platform for language or for symbol. And it's very, very interesting to me to think about inputting text into a chatbot that generates a speculative design for a building that could then serve as a symbol for dialogue and text. And so there's this really fascinating kind of turnover and cyclicality. And I also think that that's true in the kind of material research of your project, Robert and Duke's, and just thinking about how, whether they're the intangible things like language or the tangible things like inputs and plastics and other materials, that we could be recapturing those, and in the process of recapturing them, we do things a little bit differently and we learn from that process. So I was going somewhere with that, but
Oh, good.
well, I was curious, in a way, and I was also struck, Ifeoma, by what you were saying about having to do basically extra work to get the chatbot to produce the images that you wanted, to kind of overcome its own biases. You were essentially having to force it to do that extra work, to sort of decenter the kind of default white male, subject of the visuals. And I think that is really interesting to think about. And I'm curious, for both of your projects, whether you are understanding the computational research as somehow shareable or reproducible in a way that could be distributed so that other people can expand on it, can kind of continue to iterate on the work that you're doing just over the course of this year.
Great question. And I think, at the end of our workshop, we were kind of feeling a little bit deflated because of that sort of the challenge it took to get to a space where the images were getting anywhere close to what people that allow people to feel a sense of agency in the process. And I think we were thinking about what could a workshop be like, where we could, knowing what we know now, if we were to do the workshop again, we would probably set it up and have a few words available for folks that were architectural, at least be able to preempt the fact that you have to do that extra work, and make that, available in a framework before the workshop begins. And so I think if that extra work that needs to be done to get to a place where when people come to the room, that they have a series of words that are available for them, that they can just pull those words together, I think would make for a more fruitful experience, rather than some of the, and it was a lot of tug and war and back and forth. This wasn't seamless at all. The images make it seem like, oh yeah, we did this thing, but it was really it was a struggle, and I think it was a beautiful struggle. And I think it reflected the reality of experiences that we do experience in the world, and design, and how design represents who we are and our culture and our identities. And so I think there would need to be definitely more work. to sort of curate a series of terms that people would then choose from. And that would make for, I think, a more accessible process for sure.
Yeah, I found it, sorry, I found it fascinating that the default setting on AI was so gendered and racial. Also with both of your projects, I just wanted to comment, and I really appreciate that in each of your presentations, you showed and discussed, quite frankly, where you needed to sort of take 2 steps back and reframe things, whether it was on concrete mixes and how to spray it, or whether it was on how to control the AI and come up with terms, but that you were creating your whole new frameworks in both cases as you were moving forward. But sorry, Antoinette, I didn't mean to
No,
cut
it's
you off.
okay. No, it's interesting that when we talk of physical space and what trauma-informed design means is that our built environments have an emotional impact. And so when we're looking at artificial intelligence, then what that means is our digital environments also have an emotional impact. And one has to be very intentional about the experience that's curated and balance it out between having a curated experience while also creating a way for folks to have agency.
I want to let Robert and Dukes respond to that question really quickly. And then we have 2 audience questions, which maybe we can just get to at the very end. So we'll just take these 2 audience questions for folks who are watching. But Robert and Dukes, if you have any thoughts to add on that question first.
I think the kind of quick response for us is we are very interested in and focused on reproducibility from the point of view of research. But more practical, like application of it is things like this from the grant, like a lot of what we've learned there, or before it with the inflatable studios and then coming out of it afterwards does first kind of get directly translated to experiments in the academic space. So it's exposing a wide audience that can take what we've learned and understand and say, here's how it works, and then iterate on that in kind of that interesting creative space where you don't really know what they're going to get because there's a lot of knowns and a lot of unknowns that come out of it. And then even, taking that further to documenting a lot of the processes so it can be hosted for others to access, and even just open up. There is a big manual somewhere of how all this works that's slowly being edited so that it can be available to anyone.
And then also, I mean, we haven't really spoken that much about it because the grant, let's say, enabled us to do something very specific that was very tied to technology. There's a whole political domain to our work, which is we want young designers, any young designer, to see that all these techniques and mechanisms and ways of making can be used in a political context. So we like to make pavilions, we like to engage an audience, we like to try to find topics where the way of making or the use of material or the problems of the use of those materials become a political question that we can discuss in a public realm. So there are 2 ways that we can sort of test our work. One is have other academics look at it and tell us that we did something right or wrong. But very importantly for us in the context is working with young designers is to put it out in the world and have conversations about how this is impactful for them. So there's, I would say that's for us always one big next step that we need to address.
Thank you. Yeah, so we have 2 audience questions for you, Ifeoma and Antoinette. I think you maybe answered one of them just directly in the Q&A, but the first question was just wondering how you reckon with the violent history of architecture as a weapon of oppression, erasure, and so on when dreaming of tangible architecture of reparations, how you reckon with that. And then I believe you just, it looks like you just answered the second question, which was just about how you imagine AI will be a part of your practice going forward. If you want to respond to those really quickly.
Yeah, thank you. So my response to the second question was that I think it could be a good tool for working with youth in participatory design and art making. And so the art project I mentioned that I'm working on for this summer, we will be working with youth in particular of Central Brooklyn in art making, in public art making. And so hope, looking to use this mid-journey workshop and develop it further to make it accessible for young people. And then to answer the first question, which I think is a great one, and really I think at the heart of this research project was really acknowledging that there are spaces that hold this trauma associated with oppression and erasure. And I think that is what the reparations in public space was really diving into. And so the reckoning with this violent history is to use a trauma-informed practice, centering joy, centering comfort, centering connection. It's also thinking about what was lost. And in particularly as it relates to the African burial grounds across the city, they represent this loss of freedom, this loss of connection to cultural heritage, this loss of a sense of identity. And so the response that we are exploring is the use of design to bring that back to the forefront, which is why there's this exploration of Nigerian cultural heritage, which is why there's this exploration of trauma-informed design and healing practices, both here and on the African continent, and really weaving them together to craft new spaces that hold a different narrative, a narrative that is not associated with oppression or erasure, but a narrative that's associated with liberation, joy, art making as a form, as a modality for healing. And so, yeah, I think that is the essence of it. I think the storyline that we're going for here, and hope everybody join us June 15th to August 15th at Pratt Institute Gallery to check out what we produce.
And I want to add to that too, when it comes to erasure, like that also as we're recreating, that we're not bringing in erasure of what happened as well. We're not bringing in erasure of the pain. There's a distinction between reparations or repair and respite. Like respite gives you a break from what's so, not necessarily flight from it, but a break from it. But repair engages with the wound. And so that's why it's really important for us to acknowledge. That's the first step, to acknowledge, and then find ways to integrate that and to find the wisdom that's buried in there only once we've been able to do that shadow work.
Thank you. Yeah. So we are at time. I think one of the key takeaways is, 15 minutes is hardly enough time to get a full sense of the extraordinary amount of work that you all have been doing, both within, the grant period and also just building on that and extending it further. So I encourage everybody who's watching to keep an eye out for the next events in the series. We're going to be exploring some other projects that are doing completely different things, but also to follow these two projects and the ongoing work, because it's certainly far from finished. So any parting thoughts from anybody? No obligation.
Well, I just want to acknowledge today is February 29th. We have the leap year. It is Black History Month, and every day is Black History. Those are my parting thoughts.
Sounds like a good place to stop. And we will make sure at the Architectural League to find a way to get the word out on a portion of our website of any additional public presentations and displays of the work that was funded by these independent project grants. And on behalf of the League, a huge shout out both to Chris and Heron and to Dan Chofie, who put so much time into thought at every stage of this process. So we're really excited to hear more about the realized projects and also to see what's coming up next.
Thanks, Anne. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here, to everybody who attended, and we'll see you at the next one. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.